Hey everyone, welcome to the video. Go my cheat sheet for today's only main slate for today on DraftKings. Before we continue though, if you could leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on my new videos, I'd really appreciate that. You can also follow me on Twitter at ChrisPennell16. If you'd like access to my entire MLB sheet and my Slack chat, the link is in the description below for my Patreon. So anyway, let's dive into this big slate. I believe it's 15 games, so we got every team on the slate. So we have Gerrit Cole versus the White Sox, Jack Flaherty versus the Royals, Chase Anderson versus the Twins, Max Fried versus the Mets, and Kikuchi versus the Tigers. So let's take a little look at the pitching sheet to see why I like these guys. So up top we have Gerrit Cole, 12,700. Now he costs an arm and a leg, but he's got 50-point upside in this matchup. I know that's a lot of points to say, but honestly, I think he does. It's more realistically around 30 to 40, but he gets a great great matchup versus the White Sox, who are just dreadful versus right-handed pitching. If we look at Gerrit Cole's numbers this season, he's been excellent, arguably the best pitcher in the league. 2.81 xFIP, 36.8% strikeout rate, which is insane. And then only a 6% walk rate, only a 35% hard contact rate. So all the numbers check out. And if you look at the splits versus righties for the Chicago White Sox, it is not very good, and that's why I like Gerrit Cole a lot tomorrow. They're striking out a league high 26.6% to righties, 143 team ISO, 292 team WOBA, 81 WRC plus versus righties. So this is an awesome spot for Gerrit Cole. Now I don't think he is an absolute necessity just because of this slate and all the good bats on it, and he's nearly 13K, so it does take a big hit to your salary. But I do think he's a fine GPP option. Probably not a cash option for me being that expensive, because we do have a really good option in Jack Flaherty, which I will talk about now. So Jack Flaherty, he's got ace level stuff, obviously nowhere near Gerrit Cole, but he's pretty good. He's got a 3.85 xFIP, 28.6% strikeout rate, 7% walk rate. It's a little bit up there. It's not too bad though. And hard contact rate, 40%. It doesn't get a lot of ground balls, but I think he's a fantastic play versus versus the Royals. They just don't have a ton of firepower in their lineup. Now I know Jorge Soler and Hunter Dozier and Whit Merrifield are pretty good, but Jack Flaherty is a much better pitcher than they are hitters. Now, that's no disrespect to Dozier or Soler or Merrifield. They're pretty good hitters, but I think Flaherty can overpower them in this lineup. He's got good strikeout stuff, and the Royals just don't have a ton of power versus righties overall in their lineup outside of a few guys. They're not striking out a ton versus righties, only 22%, but only a 155 team ISO, 307 team WOBA, and 89 WRC plus versus righties. So I think this is a good matchup for him. He's my favorite pitcher on the slate just based off the price, because I do think he is a 10K and above pitcher. He's had some pretty good games recently, so sign me up for Jack Flaherty tomorrow. He's my favorite pitcher of the day. I think I have him tagged as a core play as well. Then we're going to scrape the bottom of the barrel here with some cheap guys. So let's talk about Max Fried first, going against the New York Mets. Now, is this the best matchup in the world? No, but I do think Max Fried's a little cheaper than he should be. He's only 6,700, so he's below 7K. He's got some decent numbers this season. Take a look at 3.4 xFIP, which is really good compared to the rest of these guys in this salary range, and 23% strikeout rate, which is pretty good. 6.8% walk rate. Gets a lot of ground balls, 53%. Only 22% fly ball rate. So I think overall this is a pretty decent play at this price. Now the matchup is not the best versus the Mets, who have been hitting really well recently. They've been on fire, but I do believe he had a pretty decent game versus the Mets recently. Didn't have the best game in the world, his most recent game versus the Mets. But at only 6,700, I think he's got 20-point upside. And I'm not really expecting 20 points, probably more between like 12 to 16. But he does have that upside there with his 23% strikeout rate and 3.4 xFIP. So I don't mind if you want to use Fried as your SP2. And then we have Kikuchi at 5,300. Now, I hate using Kikuchi. I played him once and it did not end well, and I never played him again. Now, he's had some decent games, but he's not the best pitcher in the world, and that his numbers will back that up. 5.14 xFIP, 16% strikeout rate, 7% walk rate. He's got a decent. He has a decent ground ball rate at 45%, but he doesn't have a lot of hard contact either at 36%. So I don't think this is the worst play in the world. The Tigers do struggle versus lefties, not as much versus righties, but still overall not a very good team versus lefties. So if we take a look at their splits versus lefties, it's a 25% strikeout rate, a 150 team ISO, 300 team WOBA, 85 WRC plus, and the Tigers lost their best hitter versus left-handed pitching, and Nick Castellanos to the Cubs. So that's a boost for Kikuchi as well. He's dirt cheap. He's someone you could pair with Gerrit Cole, and it wouldn't really hurt your salary that much. So I don't mind Kikuchi at SP2. And then Chase Anderson's another guy I don't mind. So Chase Anderson versus the Twins. Now I know I have a rule that I don't play pitchers versus the Twins, but I might make an exception here because Chase Anderson is a big reverse splits guy, and they don't have Nelson Cruz, which is the main guy I was worried about. So if Nelson Cruz was actually playing, he'd be one of my favorite plays on the slate versus the reverse splits righty Chase Anderson. Now Chase Anderson's pretty tough on lefties, and really he's just been pretty consistent this season. Now he might be getting a little bit lucky because his ERA is 3.7 compared to his 4.93 xFIP. But he should see a decent amount of lefties, and he's a big reverse splits guy. He's been pretty good versus lefties this season. If you take a look at splits, he's only allowing a 236 WOBA versus them, a 138 ISO, 22% strikeout rate. So that's pretty good versus lefties, and that's pretty good for guys going against guys like Jason Castro, Max Kepler, Eddie Rosario, and a couple of other guys like Jorge Polanco, Marvin Gonzalez. So I think he's going to be in line to hit value here at 5,800. He should be able to get you in the teens. If you look at his numbers versus righties, that WOBA jumps up to 361, 217 ISO, and the strikeout rate bumps up a little bit, but overall he's better versus lefties, so I do think it's a decent spot below 6K. And I think that's going to do for pitchers, so that's just my opinion on them. Now we can get into the bats to see who I like for offense tomorrow. So at catcher, we have Gary Sanchez at 4,300 versus John Means. Now, John Means is another guy who's getting really lucky this season. His ERA and xFIP are like 3 points different, and it's just insane. I've been waiting for it to regress, but it still isn't. So maybe it's not really that much luck. Maybe something's just working for him, but the numbers do suggest he is getting lucky. And Gary Sanchez has been murdering the Baltimore Orioles pitching this season. I think that continues versus Means. He's pretty cheap at 4,300, so I don't mind using him at all. I think he's going to be pretty high owned, as are most of the Yankees. The Manny Pena versus the lefty Martin Perez. Pena is the Brewers catcher versus when they are facing lefties most of the time, so I do like using Pena. He's been very good versus lefties this season. Then Jeff Mathis if we need the punt play versus Benoni, who in Mathis is an absolute bare minimum price tag, and he's been somewhat halfway decent versus lefties, so I don't mind using Jeff Mathis for a punt play. Then at first base, we have Daniel Murphy in Coors Field versus Zach Gallen. Now, I don't think Coors is an absolute must like it was yesterday. The implied run total was 14 for that game. This game it's 12 because we have two decent pitchers on the mound with Gallen and John Gray. So I don't think it's an absolute must play to stack up Coors on this slate. And there's plenty of other good offenses anyway. So like I said, don't think it's a must, but it is Coors Field. So and they should be lower on than usual. So yeah, Daniel Murphy versus the righty, Joey Votto versus Joe Ross. Now Joe Ross has actually been okay versus lefties this season, but I prefer the lefties from the Reds on this side of the game. I'm going to give them the advantage versus Joe Ross and a pretty bad bullpen in Washington, and he's only 4K. Jesus Aguilar versus the lefty, Eric Lauer. Aguilar smashes left-handed pitching, so I don't mind using him. He's really cheap. Second base, we have Gleyber Torres at 4,400. Now, he is absolutely murdering Baltimore Orioles pitching. I believe I just got a notification that you set a record for something along the lines of most homers versus one team in a season or something like that. So, Torres has been very good versus lefties. John Means, if we are going to attack John Means, we want to use the righties where his strikeout rate dips substantially. So, give me Gleyber Torres at 4,400. All these Yankees prices are pretty low, so I can see them being having quite a bit of ownership tomorrow. Josh Van Meter, who's a core play for me tomorrow at 3,900. Just cheap lefty versus Joe Ross. Adam Frazier at 3,300 versus Griffin Canning. Now, Griffin Canning does have a decent strikeout rate, but he allows a ton of fly balls and a good amount of power to left-handed bats, so I don't mind using Adam Frazier at that price point, and he's going to be leading off. Then at third base, we have Chris Bryant at 4,800 versus Jason Vargas. Chris Bryant smashes left-handed pitching. Jason Vargas is more susceptible to right-handed power, so I do like Chris Bryant quite a bit. Jake Lamb at 4K, just cheap lefty versus John Gray in Coors Field. And then Carpenter and Edman, so I just want all the lefties I can versus Glenn Sparkman. Glenn Sparkman is going to be the pitcher for the Royals tomorrow. He's absolutely awful versus lefties, so I don't mind using one of those two guys. And then at shortstop, we have Trevor Story at 5,600 versus Zach Gallen. Trevor Story is absolutely murdering righties this season. He had an excellent game last night, and I can see that continuing versus Gallen. Now he is 5,600, and Gallen's a pretty decent pitcher, but like I said, this is probably a better GPP stack. Probably not absolutely must in cash just because of the pitchers on the mound, but it's never really, not too often you get cores at a lower ownership, so So I'm taking a stab at Story. Then Gleyber Torres at 4,400. He's going to be pretty high owned tomorrow, but it's for a good reason because he's multi-position eligible too, but we already talked about him. Then Gene Segura at 3,800 versus Jose Quintana. Gene Segura has been absolutely amazing versus left-handed pitching this season. He's got a big splits where he's really, really good versus lefties, so I don't mind using him at that 3,800 price tag. In the high-end outfield, we have Charlie Blackmon at 5,600 versus Zach Gallen. Now, I would prefer the lefties versus Gallen, and Charlie Blackmon checks that box. And Michael Brantley at 4,800. Now, he's a core play for me tomorrow versus Ivan Nova. Nova sucks versus lefties. Michael Brantley is elite versus righties. Does not strike out. Ivan Nova doesn't. I don't know. Ivan, who cares? His strikeout rates are really low versus left-handed bats. Michael Brantley does not strike out at all, so I do like Michael Brantley a lot. Then Chris Bryant, we already talked about, versus Jason Vargas. In the mid-range outfield, we have David Peralta at 4,700. Cheapish lefty in cores versus John Gray. Nick Castellanos at 4,500 versus Jason Vargas. Castellanos is elite versus lefties, elite versus left-handed pitching. He's been hitting well since he's been on the Cubs, and he's only 4,500, so I don't mind using him. I think he's a core play for me tomorrow. Then Ryan Braun versus the lefty Martin Perez. Braun smashes lefties, so I do like using him there. And then in the value outfield, we have Aaron Judge at 4,400. I guess he's not really a value outfield, but for Aaron Judge at only 4,400 versus a lefty and John Means. I think that's a pretty good spot for him, and he's going to be pretty chalky yet again. Jesse Winker leading off versus Joe Ross. Lorenzo Cain should have a good spot in the order versus Martin Perez. And then Josh Fremita we already talked about. And then the core plays for me tomorrow are Jack Flaherty, 9K, Josh Fremita at 3,900, Michael Brantley at 4,800, and Castellanos at 4,500. Anyway, guys, forgot. The top stacks for me are the Yankees, the Astros, the Coors game, just because it's Coors, you can always pop off. The Reds, the Cubs, and then the Angels. I don't have any Angels listed, but I think they're in a decent enough spot. So anyway, guys, that's all I got for the video. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on my new videos. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd be happy to answer them. And I wish you guys the best of luck tomorrow.